Welcome to the PowerCat Podcast, the original K-State sports show. Here's your host, Tim Fitzgerald.
Welcome to the PowerCat Podcast. Fitz and Gills today. Ryan Gilbert, the managing editor of this sleek operation. We gave the young guys the week off because we're going to drill down on the status of Kansas State men's basketball. So got some great questions, some new question askers, and then we'll go into VIP session for one tremendous question. I love this question, and that will be in a separate file. It'll go up just for our subscribers at GoPowercat, so it can live behind the paywall. It does not appear on the YouTube machine. But as we got ready to start this podcast, we actually had to delay the start by a little bit because we had some breaking news here on this Wednesday evening. Gills, a player has departed who was never here. Now sort that out for the listeners.
Well, Ashton McGee visited Kansas State.
Oh, that's right. He had been here.
Been to Manhattan. Okay. Was maybe, a month and a half, give or take, committed to Kansas State. And, yeah, Wednesday afternoon announces he's reopening his recruitment decommits from K-State. And, Fitz, I'm sure we can get into that with some articles and stuff. I did share on our message boards that Frank Miskelly, who is now an assistant at ULM, was a Mississippi guy just like McGee. So that might be just kind of the root cause of maybe this situation here. But, you go on X and a lot of people are reacting in different ways. Fitz, it's obviously this is not the Houston model. It's very clear and obvious that this is not what Jerome Tang had initially said that he wanted to do earlier this season. I think so. Just in terms of, if we can all agree on that and just kind of let that go, that's not what's going to be happening, at least for this year. The frustrating part with that, Fitz, is Tang's just been all over the place, man. You come in your first year and you have to build a new roster, not wanting to keep Weber's players around. That's fine. You get that. You win with those players. That's great. But that was one kind of strategy. And then you have, RJ and Day and Buddy Rich coming in as freshmen, all 4 stars, right? And then you go out and rebuild a roster with all this NIL money that you have, and you want to get stars from the portal, and that doesn't work out. And now you say you want to be like Houston and get old and develop guys in your program, and then that spurs you to want to sign a pair of high school commitments in the 2025 class. One of them is now gone. You say you want to retain these players from this past season, and there's only 4 guys as of right now, and things can always change, Fitz. Only 4 guys as of right now that are set to come back, or I guess I should say have not entered the portal yet for Kansas State. So the frustrating part is just how things have just been all over the place. And the message has always been different. The strategy, the way that Tang wants to attack roster construction just has not been consistent since he arrived in Manhattan. And I understand that maybe the rules change a little bit, right, with the NCAA and the portal, and college basketball is evolving. It is changing. But to see a player like Ashton McGee go, who, if we can be honest here, if we can be blunt, might have been, the bottom towards the bottom of the roster next year, just in terms of talent and, readiness to play. It's not a big loss really in terms of losing the player. It's just more further proof that this Houston model that Tang spoke of is just, it's not happening.
Yeah. Here's my disconnect with this. Either you lost a kid who almost had no other offers, decided not to come here. I think this was Frank's guy, and they just said, okay, just go be with Frank. But here's my problem. If you didn't really want him on your roster, you should have never taken his commitment. Why are you using roster spots to reward staff members with their guy? And I'll say this. I know he's unranked or unrated and didn't have many offers. And highlight films, highlight videos are highlights. You don't see the whole game. You don't get the full context. I think this kid's got a huge upside. I think athletically he can play at the highest levels. Can he be a player at the highest levels is the question, and can he develop? I'm going to be keeping an eye on this player for next couple of years, and I won't be surprised if he's in the portal at some point, going to a bigger school. We'll see. Well, that was today's kick in the junk. After the earlier kick in the junk, which was more significant, it was actually 3 kicks in the junk, followed by the dog, Doug, going into the portal. Sounds like Brendan Housen's found, I don't even care at this point. That guy from Amarillo's found a home in Iowa City. Best of luck with that. Dude, we need some good news. And they've got 2 portal guys, but I'm not feeling the warm fuzzies because I feel like both of those guys are role players. The role they haven't filled is people that are actually going to win games for you, your alphas in terms of offense and leadership. And I don't know where they're going to find that at this point. I just don't. And as we've been covering at GoPowercat, you've been covering, they're churning overseas. They're working hard. Coach Winchester is busting ass on that. And maybe that'll be the route, but we'll see. Lots going to happen here between now and August. Brother, K-Staters need some good news. They just do.
Yeah. And you saw someone on X say that Pete Hughes is thankful for Jerome Tang. Who are they playing? I honestly can't remember.
Was it UConn? It was Huskies. I didn't even notice. I mean, we were busy today with
Northeastern, I believe.
Was it Northeastern?
Yeah.
They have the same.
And they've lost back-to-back games here. And so it's like, if this basketball news wasn't so prominent, I think more people would be upset about baseball, but there's just so much. And yeah, fans need good news. I guess spring football's been encouraging everybody, not everybody, but Avery Johnson's looking good. There's some guys banged up, but there's your good news, Fitz. Spring football's looking good right now.
Yeah, look, college baseball, midweek games are a different animal. It'd be like if you played your Big 12 games over the weekend and then the midweek team would come in, but the schedule's so grinding on your Big 12 schedule, you got to sit some of your key players. Like you don't pitch any of your best pitchers in these midweek games. So they can screw up your win-loss and maybe your power rating or whatever they use now. But in the end of the day, you're saving all your best arms for Big 12 play. We'll see how that works. I don't know. Even I'm a little bit like, well, we could use some better news. We had a good football press conference today, Gills. I got a power talk up yesterday about that, and I think people will find some good news there. But let's move on now. Great questions from Wabash Station. I'd like to congratulate everyone who got their question in, and I'd like to say that I think Ryan Gilbert picked better than I do. I feel like I'm not good at it, Gills. This is my way of getting out of work. So I think you should probably do this from now on.
Zach Carlson taught me everything I know, the art of picking questions.
God, we're going to get some Formula One questions pretty soon. Peace. Here we go. First one up is from SES RefCat. I love this question. How can this current model of college basketball be sustainable? This whole system has turned me off from the game. I got to admit, SES, it's not that much fun to cover. It's not. I mean, you just have no connection with players. You see it as fans, but as media too, we're reacquainting ourselves with a whole new roster almost every year. And Gills, it kind of sucks. I feel this more in basketball than football. I feel like the portal in basketball is more of a mess than football. I don't think football is great, but as we head towards the rev share for the fall, I think this is the last gasp of this chaotic portal. I just do. The numbers will be going down. So I think there's a gold rush here where everyone's trying to get their hands on as much money as possible. And it's making it even more annoying. Give me your thoughts.
Well, the word sustainable in the question, I think, is key right now from a fan's perspective, or just enjoying the game, I guess, so to speak. Yeah, it loses its luster, but Florida still won the national championship. There were still 4 teams in the Final Four. There were still 68 teams that made the big dance. You know what I'm getting at here, right? You can still win. You can still go win a national championship in this day and age. Now, the way you go about that might change. It's drastically changed over the last 5-10 years, but there's still a formula there. There's a blueprint there. How you go about doing that is obviously challenging. And I believe there's a question here kind of later on here about, following players. It's going to be a lot tougher to latch on to players and kind of get to watch them grow, right? At Kansas State in Manhattan, you go through the growing pains and then they blossom by the time they're older, right? Those days seem to be gone, but there's still there's going to be winners. You can still win in this era. It's a lot different, of course. So is it sustainable to maybe be as interested as you once were? Probably not, but there's ways to sustain winning. Obviously, teams have won by building new rosters year after year. Teams have won by keeping guys year after year. There's different ways to go about it. That's, there's sustainable parts of this world.
So everyone wants to talk about the Houston model, which Coach Tang brought up. And I like the idea, but you have to understand this also. That doesn't happen in a year. The Houston model is getting players, retaining them, and developing them, and then adding transfers into that. Well, you got to get to the sustaining players. And honestly, David Castillo, the players that are coming back aren't anywhere near what you need to be the Houston model. Let's be blunt. I mean, you're going to need to recruit high school at a higher level. They're falling short in many ways with the Houston model. And that in part is because they started the year with a completely different plan. You and I sat in a lunch and they talked about we're only going to recruit 5-star high school kids in transfer portal. Well, by Big 12 season had hit, that was pretty much out the window. They knew they had to go get some dudes out of high school. And but the reality was they're going to have to hit the portal still, because you just can't start over with all freshmen, particularly if you missed out on all the 4- and 5-star guys. They're kind of in midstream now, and they're drowning, and they need to find a way to shore it and find an effective plan for next season. They're a long ways from it right now, Gills. And this whole process of what's happened to college basketball is, this is my favorite word lately. It's gross. It's just, this is ugly, man. This is just, we got players quitting over contracts in college athletics. Where do we go wrong, Gills? Why don't we get contracts?
Real quick, Fitz, to your point you made just a minute ago. Yeah. Xavier Wilson and Ashton McGee, those guys don't necessarily replicate that Houston model. No. You had that with Buddy, Day, and RJ, and they are all gone now, right? So, Kelvin Sampson, I'm not going to lie, I don't know the numbers, but I would highly assume that he was getting 4-star, 5-star guys, and not, I think McGee and Wilson are both 3 stars. I think McGee was unrated before Kansas State was in the picture. Like, that's just apples and oranges.
He didn't have a bio.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
It's odd that first recruiting class they had, first full recruiting class after their first year, they had some pieces in the first group, but they got it right. They did. Letting Day go was a mistake. I'm not going to say it was a huge mistake, because Day's an okay player, but he helps you. He would have played last year. I think they've been too impatient with what they have and too eager to think what's out there available is better, because it hasn't been. It just hasn't been. Another question here from another newbie. It looks like Topif. Is that what that is? Topif. It's got to stand for something. I hope it's something obscene. Hope he just made me say something that made him giggle, or her. Since most of our players transfer out every year, should Tang focus on recruiting experienced guys with 1 or 2 years of eligibility, maybe for majors? Yeah, I was just noting and doing my power talk for the football press conference. Everyone's raving about the 3 receivers they brought in. 2 are seniors. They're just going to be done. I mean, one of them, Tibbs, will be around for 2 years, but I think in basketball, you can't constantly be recruiting one and dones. Guys that have, if they're high level freshmen, one and done, that's one thing. But if they're a senior on the end of their career, I just don't think that's a healthy way to operate a program, to do that with like 3 or 4 guys in a year. You want to be experienced, but you also want young guys that grow into that experience. And you can't just forego having young guys in your program, which I feel like they've been doing somewhat intentionally, going really light on the young guys. And I've never been comfortable with it. I thought maybe that's the way it works in the transfer portal era. And you know what? It's not. It's just not.
Unless you're John Calipari at Kentucky for all those years. Yeah, those one and dones, that's not going to do it.
Didn't really work for him.
Right. Eventually it didn't. Correct. if you believe that you can go get a guy who is a sophomore or out of the high school ranks, someone that's younger with a lot of eligibility left, if you think you can go get him and you believe that he is going to stay and stick around, whether he plays 30 minutes and starts, he redshirts, he doesn't play at all. If you think you can get him to stay around, then by all means go after them. But I have very little confidence. I would assume the staff has very little confidence that it can keep players like that want to come in for 4 years. And now obviously players might say one thing when they're coming out of high school, and then they see just how steep this challenge is at the college level, and their message might change a little bit. But to the question here, getting experienced guys with 1 or 2 years left of eligibility, I think that's personally better, Fitz. That's better than going out and grabbing younger players that you want to maybe quote unquote plan to have stick around for a number of years. But the likelihood of them staying, Fitz, for more than 1 year is just so low. I mean, this staff's track record of keeping players that it gets out of the high school ranks. We haven't mentioned Dorian Finister yet here. He was here for 1 year, redshirted. He redshirted and then played a year and then left, right? Jarrell Colbert had, time remaining. Cam Carter did as well. And I could go on and on and on about some of these players that, on Wednesday, McGee's a great example. And until you can prove that you can get players like that to truly stay, why not? Why not just go out and get 1-2 year players with 1 or 2 years left of eligibility?
I'll be really honest here. I think player retention is on the coaches more than they want to admit. If you bring in some high school guys and you want to keep them, you got to put them on the floor. I'm not talking putting them on the floor in Allen Fieldhouse or when Houston comes in, but when you're playing no-name state on a Tuesday in early December, they need to play. They need those moments, and you need to see them in those moments to understand better what you have. And they just don't consistently give guys much of a chance to play like that. And I mean, David Castillo started seeing a lot more time at the end of the season. Once Jerome Tang changed his plan, he realized, okay, I'm going to have to put this kid out there. We're going to lose him, a kid that really wants to be here. He's kind of the model of it. Maybe not the level of player that you, at the end of the day, you want to get, but he wants to be in Manhattan, Kansas. This is where he chose and where he wants to play. And if he leaves, it's at the feet of the coaches. Or maybe, David just doesn't pan out at this level, but you got to play him. You got to find out. And I thought they found out with Day that he could help. I really did. And they really didn't put much effort in saving him. And essentially CJ Jones took over his spot. And you know what? CJ is going to be an important player for next year, but he is an equally flawed player to Day. You traded in a player that you thought had shortcomings for another player with different shortcomings, but just as substantial. And you lost the freshman that was going to develop in your program. So, yeah, they've got to find a way to get players that are worthy of playing and then play them and retain them. That's a sports reporter with the plan, but also knowing in the real world, it's much more complex and difficult than that because you're managing so many of those. Go for it.
Before you go to the next question, David Castillo, I'm glad you mentioned him. It is so tough to, and I wrote about this on GoPowercat, and this is maybe a little bit of a preview to our VIP question on GoPowercat. But I wrote about, David Castillo needs to find his confidence. And ultimately, yes, that does fall on the player, Fitz. But if you're out there playing, if you look at his game log and his minutes, like it was just an absolute roller coaster.
Yep.
It's insanely difficult to get into a groove and settle in and play calmly and not force things and find that confidence when you're playing. I think the worst was it might have been his season high against No Name State when K-State scored 195 million points. I think the next game after that, he played like 2-3 minutes at St. John's. And that happened a number of times throughout the year where he'd see a bunch of minutes and then it would go down the next game. And, so for Castillo, we're not in the locker room. I don't know if Tang is telling his players a day before the game or right before the game, or he's never told at all how many minutes they're maybe going to get or should expect in a game. We don't know. I don't know. But deep down, Castillo has not known if he's going to play a consistent amount or not. And that's something that goes into keeping a player. Now, you want a player, Castillo, for example, you want him to work for it, right? Show up in practice, buy in, do all the right things on and off the court. They have to earn it, of course, but I said this countless times this past season, Fitz. Kansas State had a sub 500 year. It didn't mean anything. It would have meant a little bit more if guys had stuck around, which Castillo and Jones check that box. But Castillo was not a starter for more than a couple games in the non-con, right? And CJ Jones wasn't a starter in Big 12 play either. Castillo, again, who knows what happened, but I mean, me and you both think of Castillo as a fine young man. To only have him in for 2-3 minutes a game consecutively just does very, very little for the trajectory of his growth and development at Kansas State.
I'm going to add this to those thoughts. When you're talking about kids need to do the right things, you listed off, do all those right things. David Castillo does that. On and off the court, he takes care of his business. He's he's a reflection of Clint Stewart, his former high school coach. He really is. He just takes care of his stuff. He's intelligent. He puts in the work, whether it's in the classroom or on the court. If players look at him and know that this guy has something to his game, I know a lot of fans are down on him, but you said it. He pressed. When you're in that position, you feel like any mistake you make is going to cut your minutes drastically. And in reality, with Jerome Tang, it has. If you make those mistakes as a young guy, you can disappear into a black hole on the bench and not be seen for weeks. We've seen that repeatedly. So you do kind of try to be perfect, and you're not, and it's a horrible way to go about things.
Jerome Tang's best players, Marquise Noel, Doug McDaniel wasn't his best ever player, but they go out and play, and they're not worried. They're not worrying about making mistakes.
They make mistakes. They stay in the game. They're expected to learn from them. They're treated like adults because they kind of handle their business that way. Maybe more Marquise and Doug, but David does that. So my point is this: in the scope of playing time, there wasn't that huge a gap between David Castillo and Buddy Rich. I mean, there was there, but by all accounts, Buddy wasn't doing things right. He was showing up late. He wasn't putting in the work. We've heard it all. He was greatly entertaining, and fans loved him, but he wasn't in the best shape. He couldn't play extended minutes. There was holes in his game. Like, defense was annoying. I get it, McCaleb. I hated defense too. I thought we should have someone come in to play defense for us, but it doesn't work that way in basketball. You got to do it all. But when there's not that big a gap between playing time for a player who does everything right and a player who does everything wrong, there's not much reward for doing everything right. Now, I think you should just do that for your own good, but the message isn't as strong when the playing time isn't sustained for someone doing it right. Reality, David didn't play up to standards, and at some point you got to take him off the court when he's making, when he's just not having one of those nights. But there was times when he's shooting the ball well, playing well, and out he comes, and then disappears for a while. So it's just hard. So it's hard for me to see the path and the plan sometimes. Here we go. Number 3 of 4 in this version of the podcast, our friend El Camino Cat with another good one. How difficult will it be to replace Doug McDaniel with a player from the portal? Doug was number 53 in the portal last year and averaged 11 and 5 assists for K-State. Gilsey makes a great point. And when they signed David, we knew he had the potential of being really good. I mean, he averaged 20 points at Michigan. Then he find out he did play all the games, and he was a problem. And then he got here and he was a problem. And he moved out of his apartment and got his own condo away from the team, and just a lot of stuff that was odd, and was butting heads with Coach Tang, who relented and let him play, and they got something out of him. I think in the big scope, he was probably ranked right, but is there a number 53 out there that can come in and replace Doug McDaniel right now? I haven't studied every guy in the portal, so I don't know, but I would say it's going to be difficult to find someone of his equivalency to be your point guard and run the show.
Some of what you just mentioned, Fitz, also backs up that point of Doug had a longer leash. Well, Doug was, he missed a game, a coach's decision, and didn't start until conference play. So I get that. Maybe this isn't the best example, but David Castillo's buy-in was never once questioned, whereas with Doug McDaniel, it was. Who played more down the stretch to end out the season, right? It was for Big 12 play. Most of Big 12 play, it was Doug McDaniel. So, right. I mean, we had that one flash in the pan. Was it Texas Tech when Moby and Castillo were on the court late? But anyways, getting away from that topic, yeah. Doug's talent is no, you can't replace that. I'm sorry. And you look at the two guys that Kansas State has gotten out of the portal from UNCW and Monmouth, right? The odds of somebody talented as Doug coming from a school like that is next to zero, right? You can't replace that. But what you can replace is grabbing a guard ahead of the snake that's on the same page as Jerome Tang and his staff from day one. And buy-in is never once mentioned. It's never once questioned. Jerome Tang said that he had a good but not great relationship with Doug McDaniel. And I applaud, Tang's honesty there, right? Like we love to hear that, but and I get it. Marquise and Tang never saw eye to eye at the very beginning. They had to work to grow to learn each other, but you can get maybe a better, I don't want to say team player for lack of a better term, but also switching gears to, the guy from UNCW, back-to-back 20-plus win seasons. Also at the NCAA tournament last year for UNCW. So, obviously that's not the same position. Doug's a point guard, but go out and get a winner. Go out and get a guy who's bought in, with the work ethic and maybe the talent of a David Castillo with the experience of, I know Coleman Hawkins isn't a good example. He didn't play point guard, but blend that together and, find somebody with potential. Fitz, this staff loves potential. They love potential. I wrote that, 5 thoughts about Doug and Ugo and Bai leaving. And it just kind of dawned on me that this staff loves potential. And sometimes that potential is not always going to work out. You have 13, now 15 roster spots for a reason. So I don't have a big issue with grabbing a guy or two who might be labeled as flyers with high potential, but they love potential. Don't load up your roster with guys who are just based on potential, because that most of the time hasn't worked out. A lot of these guys we talked about with Dorian Finister, on and on and on, that potential just hasn't necessarily clicked. But go out and grab a point guard who maybe has potential more than I'm contradicting myself here just a little bit, but more to show. In your eyes, if you're Tang and you're the staff, hey, this point guard has more to show. He's bought in. He's going to be a leader. Like I said, that head of the snake, and he might not be as talented as Doug McDaniel. He's not going to be in all likelihood, but he can still have the potential, and he can go out and try to be that dog.
The way Jerome Tang runs his program, offensively in particular, you got to have a really good point guard. When Doug was good, the team was good. When Marquise really took off 2 years ago, the team took off. He's got to find that point guard. And I don't know who's out there. I don't know what's out there. Maybe they'll find someone overseas. Maybe they should look at the little guy everyone else is passing over. It's worked for them in the past. It works for K-State football. There's something about K-State and the little guy that seems to click in this environment. But, finding that leadership right now it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough.
Why is somebody passing on a player, Fitz? Obviously, there's reasons you go into the portal. Teams might have passed on Doug for the antics at Michigan, and players, coaches might pass on another player for, he's too small, he's not quick enough, hasn't shown enough, whatever. That needs to be your edge over the other 360 whatever programs in college basketball. You're taking a guy because other teams wouldn't for something that you can try to fix as a coaching staff.
Amen. I agree with all that. One final question here before we close up shop from Klynon. It's Klynon. I don't know. With a lot of teams facing total rebuilds each year because of the transferring players, will this eventually drastically reduce NIL for the majority of players? Well, NIL is going to go down. It's going to go through rev share. If the NCAA doesn't enforce NIL in the way that they say they will, then no, nothing will be solved. So I guess I'm in some ways being foolish and thinking that the NCAA will do the right thing and use the accountants they've retained to study these NIL agreements, that they're within the framework of a reasonable amount of pay for lending your name, image, or likeness. $600 or more will go through a review process. I guess I'm hopeful that works, but I think now that Pandora's box of just handing players money has been opened, it's going to be worse than ever, Gills. It's going to be worse than ever. The NCAA doesn't seem to pay enough attention to that. And I think within the framework of the rev share, which will reduce what a lot of guys getting to your question. But I think there'll be a lot of, cash laden handshakes now, just like the old days. And that's unfortunate, but this is not sustainable. I think we guessed K-State had about $6 million in NIL money on basketball last year, 5 or 6. And that apparently is about half of what you need this year. And the money's just not there for K-State. That's a reality. K-State was never going to be able to sustain and keep up with a lot of these big spenders. And they've been blessed to have some donors that are committed to getting basketball going, but you got to be a better steward of the financial resources you're given in terms of who you're paying, how much they're paying, and how much they're going to produce for you. And I think that has made it hard to get players in. They just haven't seen that kind of impact. But yeah, I think NIL is going to go through adjustment, but people will still be paying players under the table because the NCAA, until they do something about it, it'll go on.
Yeah. And that part, the part of the question fits StreamYard only lets us get 200 characters. And I wanted to include all of it after what was read there. Kleinon said new teams every year and fan apathy leads to little value to their image or likeness. I see this destroying most fans quickly.
That's legitimate.
And so, yeah. And I kind of, the angle there is maybe, and I might defer this to you, Fitz, if you're giving, I don't know, $10 a month or $10 a year or whatever that may be, and you're just one of those little fans who maybe supports whatever they want or they can, but they're not a big donor that moves the needle. We kind of touched on this earlier, to follow a player who doesn't grow and develop in Manhattan and you just grab them out of the portal. That's an angle that, you have to take note of, that matters, right? That can start to add up. And I know that some of the big donors, you would probably be more plugged in there than me, Fitz, but, just in terms of, if you lose fans' interests, right? I think NIL, it might not be an immediate or direct drop, but if you got empty seats, you've got losing teams, fan engagement, that does matter. I mean, Tang, when he took over the job here in Manhattan from Baylor, he couldn't shut up about the fans and how much he loved coming here when he played at Baylor and coming to Manhattan. Fans make a difference. He always says, 10, 15 points that a sold-out Bramwich Coliseum gives them. It might not directly lead to, the NIL because those big boosters are kind of ultimately maybe where that lies. But, yeah, I mean, if this new era, it might tarnish some fans' interests. At the end of the day, I could see that turning into less NIL.
Yeah, I mean, we think Doug McDaniel got about $500,000. What was his market value in actual NIL here? Nothing. Nobody was going to buy anything because Doug McDaniel said, go buy this, unless it was like a shake.
A dog.
If he had gotten an NIL from something dog company, maybe that works. But look, name, image, and likeness is lending your name, image, or likeness to a business for sales, and not a wealthy donor handing you cash. In that model, there aren't that many players that move the needle. In reality, there just isn't. And there'll be a player that'll pop up and have some outside value. Say you find out that your grandfather invented tater tots. Boom, huge NIL. I mean, that's just a beacon for selling tater tots for a write-up the BYU player was able to do. So if you got that, that's cool. But for Kansas State, homegrown Avery Johnson is probably selling a lot of cars. He's brought a lot of attention to Long MacArthur, this line of dealership. He just has. That's name, image, and likeness.
Lemonade.
And now he's got lemonade, which I got to go buy. I got to go to Hy-Vee and then swing by that liquor store I like a lot and put two items together because I'm like a scientist.
That liquor store in the town in which we live.
Yes, it is. It's right up the road. I still visit them on occasion, but I honestly just don't drink as much as I used to. Not fun, Gills. You know that. I'm just not fun. I sit in the studio. My dogs are here. I've got you on the screen. It's like having another dog with me. And that's not an insult. I love dogs. Yeah, this is my life. And now I get to do another podcast. I'll be at a short one, but a VIP one with you. Are you excited about that?
I can't wait.
Yeah, that sounds sincere as hell. Here's the question we're going to answer and ask and answer on the VIP podcast for our subscribers. You can go do that right now at GoPowercat.com. Head on over. We're having a sale, 50% off. Go click that green join button in the upper right corner, and you are in the family. You're in the club. You're a very important Power Cat. That's what VIP stands for first. True or false, Tang has to find all 5 starters in the portal or international for next year's team to have any chance to make it to the tournament. That is from our friend Call Me T22. And it's a great question, and we will answer it on the VIP because we're done here. See you on the other side. Oh.
This has been a GoPowercat.com and Spirit Street production. Please support this show by subscribing to this YouTube channel or follow us on your favorite podcast platform.